In 1760, a slave ship slipped away from the West African coast under a sky the color of bruised metal, its hull crammed with more than 300 chained men, women, and children. It was logged as cargo in a ledger that did not bother to list their names, only their numbers, ages, and approximate health. That ship never arrived in the Americas. No official report mentioned its loss. No court case discussed the insurance. No captain was tried, and no survivors were questioned. The ocean swallowed the vessel whole, and history behaved as if it had never existed, quietly folding 300 erased lives into a blank space between two dates. 265 years later, that blank space flickered into existence on a sonar screen. The research vessel Indigo Current rolled gently on the swells of the Atlantic, its white hull stained with rust in places where salt and time had done their patient work. Inside the cramped control cabin, lit by the dull glow of monitors and the occasional flash of sunlight sneaking through a salt-smeared window, Ben leaned over the main sonar display with his palms flat on the console. The machine hummed softly, sweeping its beam in slow, deliberate arcs across the seafloor hundreds of meters below. With each pass, a ghost image materialized, sharpened, and then faded again into static. They were not supposed to be looking for this. The expedition's funding proposal, thick with academic language and cautious promises, talked about Portuguese merchant vessels, late 18th century trade routes, and contributions to maritime archaeology. The coordinates they had pulled from archives and old shipping logs pointed to a missing merchant ship carrying fabrics, tools, and barrels of wine that had vanished in a storm. That was the story the paperwork told. But the shape that had just appeared on the screen did not look like a merchant ship. "Run it again," Amara said behind him. Her voice was low, but there was a tightness in it that Ben had learned to recognize over 3 field seasons together. It meant, "This is not routine. This matters." He adjusted the gain and recentered the scan area. The sonar pinged, sending another sound pulse knifing down into the water beneath the hull. The display refreshed in slow slices, drawing the seafloor line by line. Grainy patches of noise resolved into a darker form. Long, narrow, slightly tilted. The bow was buried, the stern blurred by silt, but the main silhouette was clear. Merchant wrecks usually broke apart when they hit the bottom, their cargo bursting out of the hull and scattering across the sand. From above, they looked like handfuls of bones tossed across a table. This wreck was a single long wound in the seabed, a hull still mostly intact, lying on its side like something that had been laid down gently and then left to rot. "Look at the spacing along the hull," Amara murmured, leaning closer. Her hair, hastily tied back in a fraying band, cast a shadow across the screen. She tapped the image with a fingertip. "See those breaks? They're too regular to be random damage." Ben zoomed in. Along the dark line of the keel, the sonar showed tiny interruptions, evenly spaced notches where something had once broken the smooth outline of the wood. Not gaps from missing planks, fixing points. "Ring mounts," Amara said, almost to herself. They bolted something along the keel, over and over, same distance between each. She didn't say chains. She didn't need to. For a moment the small cabin seemed to shrink around them, the air growing heavier despite the constant whine of the ventilation fan. Somewhere in the back of Ben's mind, a mental list of possibilities crossed itself out until only one remained, ugly and obvious. This wasn't a lost wine ship. It was a slave ship that had never been reported missing. Outside, waves slapped against the hull in slow, heavy rhythms. On the aft deck, metal clanged as someone checked the dive ladder. A gull screamed overhead, the sound distant and shrill through the cabin door. Inside, no one spoke. The only noise was the beep of the depth readouts and the quiet drag of Ben's breath as he swallowed. "We log it, mark the coordinates, and go down," Amara said finally, her voice steadying as she shifted into the practical. "We document everything. If this is what it looks like, we may be sitting on the first physical evidence of a ship that was erased on purpose." Ben nodded, but his mind was already several steps ahead. Video footage, 3D scans, the ethics of filming a mass grave, the responsibility of telling this story without turning 300 lives into content. He pushed the thought aside and focused on the checklist. Air, depth, time, safety line, redundancies. No room for romantic ideas about ghosts when you are about to drop into cold, dark water. 20 minutes later, the Atlantic closed over his head. The transition from boat to sea was always abrupt. 1 second, the world was noise and light, and men shouting over the engine. The next, everything was muted, filtered through thick green water and the sound of his own breathing. Bubbles roared past his ears, rising in a constant silver stream. The surface above shrank quickly, turning from a choppy mirror into a pale, shimmering disk, and then into nothing at all. Ben checked his depth gauge. 6 meters. 12. 18. The light dimmed, colors draining from the water until everything was shades of blue and green. Amara descended a few meters to his left, her body aligned with the guideline trailing down from the boat. Her flashlight cut a bright beam through the murk, its cone of white light looking almost solid in the suspended particles. He tried not to think about the fact that somewhere below them lay a ship designed to carry human beings like furniture. He tried not to imagine hands, wrists, and ankles. He focused on the numbers, on the equalization of pressure in his ears, on the ritual of checking his gear visually every few seconds. At around 25 meters, the seafloor rose toward them like a slow-moving shadow. The water became slightly colder, the way it always did when they approached the bottom layer. Shapes emerged from the gloom, low mounds of sand, scattered rocks, patches of spiky coral. Then something larger took form, a long, dark curve half buried in the seabed. The wreck. It appeared first as a jagged silhouette, then as a structure with edges and angles. The ship lay on its starboard side, its remaining planks eaten soft but still clinging to the ribs like old skin on bone. Barnacles crusted every exposed surface. Narrow fish darted in and out of open seams, their silver bodies flashing briefly in the divers' lights. Ben's flashlight swept along the keel and caught on the first iron ring. It was small and rust-eaten, bolted into the wood at hip height. A short length of chain still hung from it, the links fused together by corrosion. A few inches down, another ring. Then another, and another. An entire row of them, marching out of sight along the length of the hull. The cold he felt now had nothing to do with water temperature. He could see it in his head with painful clarity, a line of bodies pressed against that wood, backs to the curve of the hull, wrists and ankles fixed to those rings. The moans and whispers, the stench of sweat and waste, the creak of the ship's timbers as it rolled. Somewhere above, on a deck washed clean by spray and wind, a captain counted barrels, argued profit margins, and talked about payload. Amara's light swung over the collapsed deck. Where the upper structure had caved in, a jagged rectangular opening yawned. A hatchway, edges splintered, leading into the dark interior of the hold. A faint cloud of disturbed silt hung just inside it, turning her beam into a glowing tunnel. She turned and met Ben's eyes through her mask, the question clear even before she made the hand signal. 2 fingers toward the hatch. A small circle. Do we go in? Every training manual he had ever read said the same thing. Wreck penetration is one of the most dangerous kinds of dive. Inside a structure this old, visibility can drop to 0 in seconds. One wrong movement can send tons of sand and rotten wood collapsing into any open space. Lines tangle. Exits vanish. Panic kills faster than any predator. But that box. He saw it as soon as he drifted closer, hovering just above the edge of the hatch. Half buried in sand a meter below the opening, wedged at an angle against a fallen beam, lay a shape that was too regular to be debris. Rectangular, the size of a small trunk or large chest. Dark wood swollen from centuries of immersion, held together by iron bands that still gripped tight. He could almost feel the intention locked into it. This is not for everyone. This must be hidden. In that moment, the risk and the history collided. On the one hand, protocols, safety briefings, worst-case scenarios. On the other, the possibility of a captain's journal sealed away from the sea, a primary account of a voyage that official records pretended never happened. Ben nodded. Once, slowly. They clipped the guideline to a solid rib of the hull and tested the knot. Amara went first, her movements careful and economical. She turned sideways to fit through the hatch, one hand on the line, the other on the edge of the opening. As she slipped inside, a puff of silt rose around her, briefly obscuring her light. Ben followed. The wood of the hatch brushed his tank with a dull scrape. For a moment his world narrowed to the circle of rubber and metal around his face and the rope under his fingers. Then he was through, and the wreck swallowed him. Inside, the water felt thicker, as if it had not been disturbed in a very long time. His flashlight beam looked narrower, its light eaten more quickly by the dense gloom. The curved ribs of the hull arched over him like the inside of a rib cage. Planks lay collapsed in chaotic angles, half sunk in sand. And then he saw the shackles. They lined the inner wall at irregular but deliberate intervals. Iron cuffs still bolted to the wood, some open and twisted, others closed and empty. Time had softened their sharp edges, but their purpose was obvious. A few still held something pale wedged in the corroded metal, small pieces of bone, smoothed by water, lodged where wrists or ankles had once strained against metal. Ben's stomach clenched. It was one thing to read about tight packing and human cargo in dry historical accounts. It was something else entirely to float in the exact space where those words had been turned into reality, to see the hardware of human suffering still in place, centuries later. Amara knelt in front of the box, planting her knees carefully in the sand to avoid stirring up another blinding cloud. Up close, the trunk looked even more deliberate. The wood was dark and swollen, but not yet disintegrated. The iron bands clung to it stubbornly, their surfaces sculpted by rust into flaking, jagged ridges. She ran her gloved hand along the lid, and stopped. Carvings. Ben brought his light closer. Lines and shapes emerged beneath the slime and sediment, symbols cut into the wood with a knife or chisel. Some curved in crescents, others crossed like paths, some repeated in tight clusters. They did not match any shipyard marks or European letters he recognized. These were not inventory numbers or ownership brands. They looked like something someone had scratched in haste, but with intention. Words from a language the captain would not have understood. A prayer, a curse, a warning. The feeling of being watched pressed down on him like increased water pressure. It wasn't logical. He knew that. It didn't come from any sound or movement he could identify. It was more like a sensation behind his eyes, a tightening in his chest, as if the hold itself were paying close attention to what they were about to do. Amara pulled a slim metal tool from a pouch on her belt, a wreck diver's quiet rebellion against stubborn locks, and wedged it into the corroded clasp. She worked it carefully, bracing her other hand on the lid. The lock resisted for a few seconds, then gave with a dull, muffled crack that seemed too loud in the confined space. The wreck creaked, a long, low groan that might have been the shifting of old wood. Or something else. They both froze. Nothing collapsed. The sand stayed where it was. Slowly, Amara lifted the lid. A cloud of black silt erupted from inside, swallowing their lights. For several long heartbeats, Ben saw nothing but a swirling storm of dark particles, like ash suspended in water. His grip on the guideline tightened until his knuckles hurt inside his gloves. He forced himself to count his breaths. In, out, in, out. Panicking inside a wreck was a fast route to never seeing the surface again. Gradually, the water began to clear. Shadows turned back into shapes. The outline of the open box emerged, its interior no longer a solid mass of darkness, but a dim recess. Inside, wrapped in thick, oil-dark cloth, lay a rectangular object about the size of a large book. The cloth had done its job flawlessly. No frayed edges, no visible holes. As Amara slid her hands underneath and lifted, the bundle held its form. The corner of the wrapping shifted, and Ben caught a glimpse of something pale and rigid beneath, the edge of a leather cover, stained with time but still intact. A journal. Not a loose log forgotten on a shelf, not a random bundle of papers. This had been sealed in, protected, surrounded by iron and symbols, placed beneath the feet of hundreds of chained people, and then given to the sea. Amara hugged the wrapped book against her chest with one arm and flashed Ben a signal with the other. Thumb up, fingers together. Up. Now. No debate. No extra curiosity. They backed toward the hatch, moving slowly so as not to collide with collapsed beams or stir up more silt. The box, now empty, lay open behind them like a mouth that had just given up its last secret. Ben forced himself not to look too long at the line of shackles along the wall. In the beam of his light, some of them almost seemed to twitch with the gentle swell of the water. As he pulled himself up through the hatch, the sensation of the wreck behind him felt almost physical, like a gaze pressing between his shoulder blades. For a second, he had the irrational idea that if he turned around, he would see faces in the dark water below, watching them carry away the only surviving words from this tomb. Then he was outside again, back in the open water above the deck, and the world expanded. They followed the guideline back up into the blue, their bubbles streaming overhead in silver streaks. The wreck shrank beneath them, turning from a looming presence into a warped, dark shape, then into a smudge barely distinguishable from the seafloor. The water grew lighter, the temperature rising fractionally. At 10 meters, the sun's glow turned from a vague brightness into a shimmering, moving ceiling. When Ben finally broke the surface, the sunlight hit him like a slap. The air tasted raw and sharp after the dry, filtered tank oxygen. Voices crashed into his ears all at once, the crew shouting, the engine rumbling, the slap of waves against fiberglass. Hands reached down, grabbing his gear, hauling him up the ladder. As he pulled off his mask, blinking against the aggressive brightness of the sky, he saw Amara already on deck. She stood bent over the oilcloth-wrapped bundle laid out on a metal table, both hands flat on either side of it as if to steady herself. No one on deck asked what they had found. They didn't have to. The weight of the thing was obvious in the way everyone instinctively kept a small distance, forming a loose ring around the table without quite meaning to. Ben stepped closer, water dripping from his suit in a steady patter. The wind tugged at his wet hair, bringing with it the smell of salt and fuel and something else. Some faint, sour note that might have been in his head, or might have followed them up from the hold. The journal lay between them, still wrapped, its edges dark with seawater. Under the layers of cloth and leather were words someone had once cared enough to hide from the world. A captain's record, a confession, a justification, or something stranger, a description of events so dangerous that the only safe place for them was at the bottom of the ocean. Ben felt that same heavy certainty settle in his chest again, denser than any piece of gear. This was not just an account of a voyage that vanished from the ledgers. Whatever was written inside had been important enough that 300 people had gone to their deaths in silence, while the ship that carried them was erased from history. And now, for the first time in more than 2 centuries, the story was about to surface, with all the consequences that might bring for anyone who dared to read it aloud. The compass started spinning 3 hours after they brought the journal on board. Ben noticed it first while logging their position in the navigation cabin. The needle jerked clockwise, paused, then swung violently west before settling back to north. He tapped the glass. The needle twitched again, as if something beneath the ocean floor had just shifted its weight. "Amara," he called, keeping his voice level. "You seeing this?" She looked up from where she'd been carefully unwrapping the oilcloth in the lab cabin next door. Through the open doorway, Ben could see the journal lying on the metal table under harsh fluorescent light, its dark leather cover still glistening with seawater. "Seeing what?" "The compass. It's drifting." She frowned, stepping into the navigation room. The needle swung again, this time completing a full rotation before stopping at southwest, exactly opposite their heading. "Check the backup," she said. Ben pulled the handheld unit from its mount. Same thing. The digital readout flickered, displaying coordinates that placed them 200 miles inland, then corrected itself with a soft beep. Outside, one of the crew shouted something sharp and urgent. They both rushed to the deck. Lena stood at the starboard rail, camera in one hand, the other pointing at the water. Her face had gone pale. "There's something down there. Moving. Too big to be a whale." Ben followed her gaze. For a moment he saw nothing but the usual Atlantic chop, gray-green and restless. Then a shadow passed beneath the surface, long, dark, moving parallel to the hull. Not the smooth glide of a marine animal. This moved in sections, like vertebrae flexing. It was gone before anyone could get a clear look. "Probably a basking shark," one of the deckhands muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "They get huge out here." "Basking sharks don't swim in straight lines that close to a boat," Amara said quietly. No one argued. Ben turned back toward the lab. The journal still sat on the table, closed now, but somehow the room felt more crowded than it had 5 minutes ago, as if opening the book had let something out that hadn't quite dissipated yet. "Let's get this documented before anything else goes wrong," he said. Inside, Amara pulled on a fresh pair of nitrile gloves and gently opened the journal to the first page. Ben set up the camera on a tripod, angling it to capture every line of text. Lena hovered behind them, notepad ready. The ink was faded in places but still legible. At the top of the first page, written in tight, controlled script, Captain Elijah Harrow, February 3rd, 1760. "Start recording," Amara said. Ben hit the button. The red light blinked on. She read aloud, her voice flat and professional. "This day we received final clearances from Cape Coast Castle and took aboard the remainder of our cargo. 312 souls by the factor's count, though I suspect these numbers are inflated for insurance purposes." The first few entries were exactly what Ben expected. Weather observations, course corrections, complaints about provisions. The language was cold, transactional. Human beings described like grain shipments. It made his jaw tighten, but he said nothing. Then, on day 5, the tone shifted. "An unusual disturbance among the cargo in the second hold tonight," Amara read. "Though all are kept in irons, there arose a noise unlike the common moaning. It was more akin to chanting, low at first, then building, overlapping voices speaking words I could not distinguish." She paused, glancing up at Ben. "He ordered them flogged," she continued. "Separated the men from the women, elders from youths." The noise stopped. But several of the crew complained of headaches and strange dreams afterward. "Dreams," Lena muttered. "That's convenient." "Keep reading," Ben said. Amara turned the page carefully. The handwriting here looked tighter, the letters pressed harder into the paper. Day 7. The men report hearing knocking when no one is at work. Some claim the ship groans even in calm seas. One fool insisted he heard singing from directly beneath his hammock, in a tongue not known to him. I have no patience for such superstitions, but I have instructed that no man go near the second hold alone after dark. Ben felt the temperature in the room drop. Or maybe he imagined it. He glanced at the porthole. Outside, the sky had turned a flat, colorless gray. "Next entry," Amara said, her voice quieter now. 3 of the younger boys among the cargo expired last night, though they bore no visible wounds. The surgeon finds no obvious cause and complains that their eyes would not close properly even after death. Lena stopped writing. "What does that mean? Would not close?" "It means they died staring at something," Amara said bluntly. The boat rocked. Not from a wave. There hadn't been time for the motion to travel from bow to stern. It felt more like something had bumped the hull from below. Everyone froze. Debris, one of the crew said from the doorway, but he didn't sound sure. Amara turned another page. Her hand was steady, but Ben noticed she was breathing through her mouth now, shallow and controlled. Day 12, she read. A change in the air today. No storm visible, yet the horizon appears blurred, as if we sail within a curtain. The compass wanders. The helmsman reports that it does not hold true north. Ben's eyes flicked to the navigation cabin. Their compass was still drifting. Amara continued, her voice dropping almost to a whisper. The women below have begun to hum when the ship creaks. The sound matches the groan of the hull, as if in answer. Mr. Cole insists this is coincidence. I am less certain. Stop, Lena said suddenly. Amara looked up. What? I don't think we should keep reading this out loud. Why not? Because, Lena gestured vaguely at the journal, the room, the boat. Because it feels like we're activating something, like reading a spell backward. That's superstition, Ben said, but even as he spoke, he wasn't entirely convinced. The air in the cabin felt thick, pressurized, as if a storm were building inside the walls. Amara stared at Lena for a long moment, then turned back to the journal. We're scientists. We document. We don't stop because we're uncomfortable. She kept reading. Day 15. This morning we found Mr. Delaney at the rail, eyes open, mouth full of seawater. He had bitten his own tongue nearly in half. The men swear they saw him step up and lean forward as if listening. Then he simply went over. He did not struggle. The room went silent. Ben felt his pulse hammering in his throat. He forced himself to focus on the camera, on the red recording light, on anything but the image of a man calmly drowning himself because something in the water had called his name. Amara's voice was almost mechanical now. There is a feeling aboard that the ship rides lower than it should, though our calculations show no loss of timber or cargo. If I did not know better, I would say we carry more weight now than when we left the coast. More weight, Ben repeated. How is that possible? It's not, Amara said. But her eyes said something different. She turned another page. The handwriting here was visibly deteriorating, letters slanting, words scratched out and rewritten. Day 17. The translator refuses to go into the second hold now. He says the people there no longer speak with him. They stare past him at the beams overhead, as if counting something only they can see. The boat rocked again. Harder this time. On deck, someone shouted. Footsteps pounded overhead. Ben stood, but Amara held up a hand. Wait. At night, she read, faster now. I feel a presence in the cabin, as if someone stands behind my chair. Once I thought I saw another face reflected in the glass, but when I turned, no one was there. Ben's skin crawled. He glanced over his shoulder reflexively. The cabin was empty. Of course it was empty, but the feeling didn't go away. Amara's hand trembled slightly as she turned the next page. The ink here was darker, more frantic. Day 19. They have stopped looking at the shore and begun to look at the water instead. She stopped. Ben leaned forward. What else does it say? She pointed to the last line on the page, written in letters so hard-pressed they had torn through the paper in places. Tonight I heard one of the women laugh in the darkness below when the hull groaned. It was not the laugh of a madwoman. It was the laugh of someone who has accepted terms in a bargain I was not privy to. The overhead light flickered. Once. Twice. Then the boat lurched violently to starboard, hard enough that the journal slid across the table. Ben grabbed it before it hit the floor. Outside, voices were shouting now, urgent and overlapping. Amara was already moving toward the door. Ben followed, clutching the journal against his chest. On deck, the crew had gathered at the port rail, staring down into the water. The sea had changed. What had been normal Atlantic chop was now unnaturally still, the surface smooth as glass. And beneath it, shapes were moving. Not fish, not whales. Shapes that looked almost human, but wrong. Limbs too long, movements too fluid, faces that flickered in and out of visibility like shadows cast by a fire that wasn't there. "What the hell is that?" Lena whispered. No one answered. Ben looked down at the journal in his hands. The leather felt warm now, almost feverish. He opened it to the last entry Amara had read. But there was more. One final sentence, written in the margin in letters so small he had to squint to make them out. "They are not trying to escape. They are calling something home." The water around the boat began to churn. And from somewhere far below, deeper than the wreck, deeper than the seafloor itself, came a sound like a drumbeat. Slow, rhythmic, deliberate. 3 beats, then silence, then 3 more. Ben's mouth went dry. He knew that rhythm. He had heard it 2 hours ago, muffled and distant, when they first opened the box in the hold of the sunken ship. Someone below deck was answering. Amara turned to him, eyes wide. "We need to go back down to the wreck. Now." "Are you insane?" Lena hissed. "We need to leave. We need to get as far from this thing as possible." "No," Amara said, her voice ice-cold and certain. "The captain's journal tells us what he thought was happening. But the real story, the one that explains why 300 people vanished and why we just woke something up, that's still down there." She pointed at the water. "And whatever deal they made 265 years ago, it's not finished yet." The drumbeat sounded again. Closer this time. Ben looked down at the journal, then at the water, then back at Amara. And he knew with absolute certainty that the worst part of the story hadn't been written yet. It was still happening. The compass started spinning 3 hours after they brought the journal on board. Ben noticed it first while logging their position in the navigation cabin. The needle jerked clockwise, paused, then swung violently west before settling back to north. He tapped the glass. The needle twitched again, as if something beneath the ocean floor had just shifted its weight. "Amara," he called. "You seeing this?" She looked up from unwrapping the oilcloth in the lab cabin. Through the doorway, Ben could see the journal lying on the metal table under harsh fluorescent light. "Seeing what?" "The compass. It's drifting." The needle swung again, completing a full rotation before stopping at southwest, exactly opposite their heading. Outside, one of the crew shouted, sharp, urgent. They both rushed to the deck. Lena stood at the starboard rail, camera in one hand, the other pointing at the water. Her face had gone pale. "There's something down there, moving parallel to us." Ben followed her gaze. A shadow passed beneath the surface, long, dark, moving in sections like vertebrae flexing. It was gone before anyone could get a clear look. "Probably a basking shark," one of the deckhands muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Basking sharks don't swim in straight lines that close to a boat," Amara said quietly. No one argued. Then Marcus, the oldest crewman, a weathered Jamaican who'd spent 40 years at sea, spoke from behind them, his voice low and tense. "We need to leave. Now." Everyone turned. Marcus was staring at the water with an expression Ben had never seen on him before. Raw, undisguised fear. "I've seen this before," Marcus said. "Off the coast of Hispaniola, 1998. Research vessel opened a wreck they shouldn't have. 3 crew members went into the water. Only one came back up, and he wouldn't stop screaming for 2 days straight." "What are you talking about?" Amara asked. "Slave ships," Marcus said flatly. "You don't disturb them. The dead don't rest easy when they died like that. And if you take something that belongs to them—" He looked at the journal. "They come to get it back." "That's superstition," Amara said, but her voice wavered. "Then explain your compass," Marcus shot back. Before anyone could respond, the ship's engine coughed. Once, twice, then died completely. In the sudden silence, they could all hear it. A sound rising from the water. Low, rhythmic. 3 beats, then silence. 3 beats, then silence, the same drumbeat from before. "Start the engine," Ben said quietly. "Start it now." The captain tried. The starter motor whined, turned over, but wouldn't catch. He tried again. Nothing. The drumbeat grew louder. Marcus crossed himself and walked away from the rail, muttering something in patois that Ben didn't understand. Amara grabbed Ben's arm. "We need to go back down. Whatever's happening, it started when we opened that box. The answers are still in that wreck." "Are you insane?" Lena said, her voice climbing toward panic. "The engine just died. Something's circling us. And you want to go back into the water?" "If we don't," Amara said, her eyes hard, "this doesn't stop. It follows us. You heard Marcus. This isn't over just because we sailed away." She turned to Ben. "The captain's journal said they made a bargain. We need to know what it was, what they promised, and what happens if it's not kept." Ben looked at the dark water, then at the journal still lying in the lab cabin. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, but he thought about Captain Harrow's final entry. "They are calling something home." He nodded. "Then I'm coming with you," Lena said suddenly. Everyone stared at her. "You'll need documentation," she said, lifting her waterproof camera. Her hand shook, but her jaw was set. "If something happens, someone needs to have it on record." 15 minutes later, 3 divers dropped backward into water that felt wrong the moment it closed over their heads. Not colder, not warmer, just aware, as if the ocean itself were watching them descend. Ben checked his gear automatically. Air, depth, buoyancy. Everything read normal. But his skin crawled beneath the neoprene, and his breath came faster than it should. They followed the guideline down. 5 meters, 10, 15. The light faded too quickly. At 20 meters, visibility dropped to almost nothing, a thick green murk that swallowed their flashlight beams. Lena was breathing hard. Ben could hear the sharp hiss of her regulator even over his own. She kept close to Amara, one hand gripping the guideline so tight her knuckles showed white through her glove. At 25 meters, the wreck appeared. And it had changed. The hull was no longer static. It moved. Not dramatically, just a slow, rhythmic expansion and contraction, like something massive breathing beneath a blanket of wood and iron. The chains along the interior wall were pulled taut now, stretched down into the sand as if enormous weight hung from them. But there was nothing visible holding them. Amara pointed down. "Keep going." They touched the seafloor beside the wreck. Sand puffed up in slow clouds around their fins. Ben aimed his light at the hatch. It was partially blocked now, not by debris, by hands. Skeletal fingers gripped the edges of the opening from inside, curled around the splintered wood. Dozens of them. They didn't move, but they hadn't been there before. Lena made a strangled sound through her regulator. Amara reached out and gently pushed one of the hands aside. It moved stiffly, like old leather, and didn't resist. She slipped through. Ben followed. Lena hesitated, then forced herself after them, her breathing now fast and shallow. Inside the hold, the water was black. Not dark. Black, as if light itself were being consumed. Ben's flashlight cut a narrow cone through the void, revealing only fragments. A beam, a shackle, the curve of the hull. Then his light found the chains. Every single one was taut now, vibrating slightly as if under tension. The iron rings bolted to the hull creaked softly. Amara moved toward the empty box. It sat exactly where they'd left it, lid open, symbols carved into the wood. She knelt and touched the carvings. They began to glow. Faint green light pulsed in rhythm with the drumbeat. Ben grabbed her shoulder. "Stop." Too late. The drumbeat returned. Louder now. Not from above. From below. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. The sand beneath them shifted. The floor of the hold began to collapse inward, spilling down into a void that opened like a wound in the sea floor. Lena screamed into her regulator, a muffled, garbled sound, and grabbed for the guideline. Ben wrapped the rope around his wrist as the current reversed, pulling them down instead of up. Through the swirling silt, he saw it. A hole, perfectly circular, cut through the bottom of the ship and into the rock beneath. And from that hole, something was rising. A figure, human-shaped, but wrong. Its limbs bent at too many joints, its head tilted at an angle that should have broken its neck. Its skin was gray and slick, covered in barnacles and strips of rotting fabric. But it was the face that made Ben's blood turn to ice. He recognized it. The features were distorted, bloated by seawater and time, but the shape was unmistakable. The nose, the jawline, the way the skull sat on the shoulders. This had been a man once, and Ben knew exactly who. The journal. Captain Harrow's entry. We found Mr. Delaney at the rail, mouth full of seawater. He had bitten his own tongue nearly in half. This was Delaney. The thing that had been Delaney opened its mouth. No sound came out. But Ben felt it. Words carved directly into his mind like fingernails scraping bone. You opened the door. You read the words. Now you must pay the toll. What toll? Amara's voice crackled through the underwater comms unit clipped to her vest. They'd brought them for emergencies, and this qualified. The figure tilted its head further. Too far. A full rotation. 300 souls were given. 300 souls were taken. The bargain was blood for passage, flesh for crossing. But the crossing never ended. More figures rose from the hole. Dozens. Hundreds. All of them wearing the remains of chains, shackles still locked around wrists and ankles. We called to the old powers beneath the water. We offered ourselves to be free of the chains above. They accepted. But freedom is not escape. Freedom is transformation. One of the figures reached for Lena. She jerked backward, kicking frantically, but her tank caught on a fallen beam. She was stuck. Ben lunged for her, but the figure was faster. Long, skeletal fingers wrapped around Lena's ankle. She thrashed, her scream audible even through the regulator, a high, desperate sound that cut through the water like a blade. Amara pulled her dive knife and slashed at the arm. The blade passed through like cutting smoke. No resistance. No effect. The figure pulled. Lena's eyes went wide behind her mask. She clawed at the sand, at the beam, at anything. But the grip was inexorable. Ben grabbed her arms and pulled in the opposite direction. For a second it was a grotesque tug of war. Lena stretched between them, her face contorted in terror. Then the figure spoke again, its voice now inside all three of their heads simultaneously. One must stay. One must witness. One must carry the words. No, Amara screamed into the comms. Let her go. The bargain is not complete. The door was opened. The price must be paid. Ben's mind raced. One must stay. One must witness. One must carry the words. 3 roles. 3 people. A choice. Take me, he said. The figure paused. Amara's head snapped toward him. Ben, don't. Take me instead, Ben repeated, his voice steady despite the terror clawing at his chest. I opened the box. I read the journal. If someone pays, it should be me. The figure considered. Then, slowly, it released Lena's ankle. She scrambled backwards, sobbing, crashing into Amara. The figure turned its eyeless gaze toward Ben. You offer yourself? Yes. Then you will witness. Before Ben could react, the figure pressed its hand against his forehead. The world exploded. He was no longer in the wreck. He was standing on the deck of a ship, not sunken, not rotted, alive. The year was 1760. Around him, sailors moved with purpose, adjusting sails, checking rigging. The sun beat down mercilessly. The air stank of sweat, salt, and something worse. Human waste, fear, despair. Below deck he heard them. 300 voices, chanting, humming, calling. Ben turned and saw Captain Harrow standing at the rail, journal in hand, writing with a shaking pen. Then the ship lurched. Not from a wave. From beneath. The water around the hull began to churn. Dark shapes rose from the depths, massive, formless things with too many limbs and eyes that glowed like deep-sea fish. The chanting below deck grew louder. Ben watched, frozen, as the crew tried to respond, tried to regain control. But it was already too late. The things beneath grabbed the hull and pulled. The ship went down fast. Too fast. No storm. No warning. Just the ocean opening its mouth and swallowing everything whole. But as the water closed over the deck, Ben heard something else. Laughter. From below. From the hold. From 300 people who had chosen drowning over slavery, who had called to powers older than nations and made a bargain written in blood and salt. We will give ourselves to you if you take them with us. Let no one profit from our suffering. Let this ship be a grave for all. The vision ended. Ben gasped, choking, back in the wreck. The figure still had its hand on his forehead. Now you understand. The bargain was vengeance. We sank. They drowned. But we did not die. We transformed. We became the guardians of this place, and anyone who disturbs it must pay. What do you want? Ben whispered. Close the door. Seal the words. Or join us. The hand released him. Ben staggered backward, grabbed Amara and Lena, and kicked toward the hatch. They shot upward, breaking every decompression rule, risking the bends. But none of that mattered because the alternative was staying down there forever. Behind them, the hold filled with figures. Hundreds of them now, pouring through the hole, reaching upward with skeletal hands. Ben didn't look back. They broke the surface together, gasping, screaming, thrashing toward the boat. Hands reached down, Marcus, the crew, pulling them up. Ben collapsed on deck, ripping off his mask. Lena was sobbing uncontrollably. Amara lay on her back, staring at the sky, chest heaving. The engine, Ben croaked. Does it work? The captain turned the key. The diesel roared to life immediately. Go, Ben said. Go now. The boat surged forward, but as they pulled away, Ben looked back at the water and saw them, rising, not swimming, rising. Dozens of figures breaking the surface, standing on the water as if it were solid ground, watching the boat retreat with eyeless faces. Then they sank back down, slowly, deliberately, waiting. That night, as they sailed toward the nearest port, Ben sat alone in the lab cabin. The journal lay on the table in front of him, still sealed in its protective sleeve. He thought about the vision, the bargain, the choice 300 people had made in chains, drowned together rather than let anyone profit from their suffering. Close the door, seal the words, or join us. He knew what he had to do, but as he reached for the journal, he felt it, a cold presence, right behind him. He turned slowly. The cabin was empty, but on the metal table next to the journal was a wet handprint. Not salt water, darker, thicker, and leading from it across the floor were more wet prints, leading to the corner of the cabin, where the shadows were deeper than they should be. From the darkness, something breathed. 3 slow breaths, then a voice, quiet, patient, inevitable. You witnessed. Now you must choose. Seal the door or open it wider. Ben's blood turned to ice, because he realized, in that moment, that bringing the journal to the surface hadn't closed anything. It had only begun the real test. And somewhere in the dark water behind them, 300 souls were waiting to see what he would do. The wet handprint moved. Ben had been staring at it for 3 hours, back pressed against the wall of the lab cabin, and he was certain. The fingers were slowly spreading wider, as if the hand beneath were pressing harder against the metal table. It was 2:47 a.m. The boat rocked gently. Outside, the Atlantic was calm, but inside this locked room, the air felt pressurized, like the moment before a storm breaks. On the table, the journal sat in its plastic sleeve, and in the corner, where the shadows were too dark, too dense, something breathed in rhythm with the waves. 3 breaths. Pause. 3 breaths. Ben's hands shook. He'd tried to sleep, tried to convince himself that what happened in the wreck was just oxygen deprivation, nitrogen narcosis, shared hallucination. But the handprint was real. The presence was real. And the choice it had given him was impossible. A knock made him flinch violently. "Ben, open up." Amara's voice, urgent. He unlocked the door. She pushed inside, hair wild, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Behind her, dawn hadn't even started to gray the sky. "Something's wrong with Lena," Amara said without preamble. "She's in the medical bay, awake, but she won't stop drawing." "Drawing what?" Amara held up her phone. The screen showed a photo. Lena's bunk, the walls covered in charcoal sketches. Hundreds of them. All the same image, repeated obsessively. Chains, hands, faces with empty eyes, and words written over and over in the margins. "Tell them, tell them, tell them." Ben's stomach dropped. "She's still connected to them." "We all are," Amara said quietly. She gestured at the handprint. "It's spreading, isn't it?" He nodded. The boat's lights flickered. The engine coughed once, then steadied. From the corner the presence spoke. Not aloud. The words appeared directly in their minds, cold and patient. "You have until sunrise. Choose." "Choose what?" Amara snapped at the shadows, her fear transmuting into anger. "You want us to tell your story? Fine. We'll publish the journal. But you need to leave Lena alone. Leave all of us alone." Publication is not enough. Words on a page can be ignored, forgotten, filed away. We require something more. "What?" Ben asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "Witnesses. Not passive readers, active carriers. Those who will feel our presence when they speak our names, who will carry our weight when they teach our history, who will never be allowed to forget." The temperature dropped 10 degrees in seconds. Their breath misted. "Tell our story, and we come with it. Forever. Wherever it goes, we go. Every lecture hall, every classroom, every screen, we will be there. And those who try to sanitize us, to make us comfortable, to turn our suffering into abstract statistics, they will feel our hands on their throats." Amara's face went white. "You're talking about haunting everyone who encounters this. For generations." "We are talking about justice." The word hit like a physical blow. Both of them staggered. "For 265 years we have been erased, reduced to numbers. 300 souls became cargo lost at sea. Our names were never recorded. Our families never knew what happened to us. We were convenient to forget. The presence grew, filling the corner, expanding until the cabin felt half its size. Now you will make us inconvenient. Tell our story. Let it spread. And accept that we will make sure no one ever forgets again." "And if we refuse?" Ben asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Then Lena will draw until her hands bleed and her mind breaks. Your engines will fail every 3 hours, 3 beats, remember, until you drift. And one by one, we will pull you down to where we wait. Not to kill you, to make you join us." The lights flickered violently. You open the door. You cannot close it by wishing. The only path is through. Then the presence receded slightly, and both of them could breathe again. Amara leaned against the wall, gasping. "This is insane. We can't unleash something like this on the world." "Can we live with the alternative?" Ben asked. Before she could answer, the door burst open. Marcus stood there, his weathered face ashen. Behind him, 2 other crew members looked equally terrified. "Captain wants everyone on deck," Marcus said. "Now." On deck, the entire crew had gathered in the pre-dawn darkness. The captain stood at the helm, one hand gripping the radio mic. "We have a problem," he said, his voice tight. "Coast Guard just called. 3 other research vessels in this area, all working on historical wrecks, have reported equipment failures, crew psychological disturbances, and he paused. Apparitions. Murmurs rippled through the group. It started the same night we surfaced with that journal, the captain continued, pointing at the lab cabin. Whatever you people woke up down there, it's spreading. That's impossible, one of the researchers said, but his voice lacked conviction. Tell that to the crew on the Mariana, the captain shot back. They found wet footprints on their deck this morning, bare feet, dozens of them, leading from the water to their research lab, then back again. They're headed to port and refusing to continue their expedition. Ben felt everyone's eyes turn toward him and Amara. What did you do? The captain demanded. We read the journal, Amara said quietly. Out loud, on this boat. So unread it, one of the crew said desperately. Apologize. Throw it back. Whatever it takes. It doesn't work that way, Ben said. He looked at the assembled faces, frightened, angry, confused. The journal documents what happened on a slave ship in 1760. 300 people chained in a hold, called to something ancient in the ocean. They made a bargain, transform us, drown us, but take our captors with us. Make sure no one profits from our suffering. And they've been down there ever since, Amara continued. Waiting for someone to find them, to tell their story. And we did. Then untell it, the captain said. They won't let us, Ben said simply. We have a choice. Publish the journal, let their story spread, and accept that they come with it, or refuse, and watch them take us one by one until we change our minds. Silence. The only sound was the slap of waves and the creak of rigging. Then one of the researchers, Dr. Sarah Chen, a historian who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. No. Everyone turned. No, she repeated, her voice stronger. I didn't sign up for this. I study maritime history, not supernatural revenge fantasies. You're talking about unleashing something dangerous on every institution, every archive, every museum that handles this material. That's not scholarship. That's terrorism. It's testimony, Amara shot back, from people who were never allowed to speak. They're dead, Chen said harshly. They don't get to make demands. They don't get to threaten the living. They were murdered, Amara said, her voice rising. Kidnapped, chained, shipped like animals. And when they fought back in the only way they could, by choosing death over slavery, history erased them, pretended they never existed. You want to do that again? I want to live, Chen said. I want Lena to stop drawing on the walls. I want to go home to my family without bringing ghosts with me. Then vote for silence, Amara said coldly. Vote to bury them again, but understand what that means. Marcus stepped forward. His voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. I've sailed these waters for 40 years, he said, and I've heard the stories. Every sailor has. About ships that went down carrying enslaved people, and how the water above them stays cold even in summer. How compasses spin. How you hear singing at night when there's no one there. He looked at Chen. You want to throw that journal back? Fine, but it won't end, because they're not asking permission anymore. They're taking what was stolen, the right to be remembered. We should vote, the captain said finally. On what? Chen demanded. On whether we publish, Ben said, knowing full well what happens if we do. The crew looked at each other. Fear, uncertainty, anger. Then Lena appeared in the doorway leading below deck. She looked terrible, hollow-eyed, her hands stained black with charcoal, but she walked steadily to the center of the group. I vote yes, she said, her voice hoarse. Lena, you don't have to, Ben started. They had me, she interrupted. Down there, I felt their hands. I thought I was going to die, but they let me go because they wanted a witness, not a victim. She held up her charcoal-stained hands. I can't stop drawing them. I see them every time I close my eyes. And you know what? I should. We all should. Because forgetting them is how this keeps happening. Tears streaked her face. I vote we tell it. All of it. And I'll live with the nightmares. Because they lived with worse. Silence. Then Marcus. I vote yes. Amara. Yes. Ben. Yes. One by one, others agreed. Some reluctantly. Some with conviction. But Dr. Chen shook her head. I vote no. And I'm leaving this expedition the moment we reach port. You people are insane. She turned and walked toward the cabins. Halfway there, she stopped. Frozen. Everyone watched as wet footprints appeared on the deck in front of her. Bare feet, walking toward her from the direction of the rail. No one was making them. The prints stopped directly in front of Chen. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then a voice, not in their heads this time, but audible, whispered by dozens of mouths simultaneously, spoke from the empty air. You voted no, so you stay. Chen screamed. The wet footprints surged forward, surrounding her, and she collapsed, unconscious, before anyone could reach her. They published the journal 3 days later. Not through traditional channels. They released everything online, high-resolution scans, translations, video documentation of the dive, Ben's account of the vision, Lena's drawings. Within hours, it went viral. Within days, it was global. And the report started immediately. A professor in London heard drumming during her lecture on the Middle Passage. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. Her students heard it too. Security found no source. A museum in Virginia displayed journal pages. At night, security cameras showed wet footprints appearing on the floor, circling the display case, then vanishing. A high school teacher in Atlanta showed the documentary in class. Afterward, 5 students reported feeling hands on their shoulders during the section about the drowning. All 5 pointed to the same empty space in the classroom. None of it was violent, but everyone who encountered the story felt it, undeniably, as if the past were not past but present, breathing down their necks. Ben watched it spread from his apartment. He'd returned to his university position, but his department chair had already called him in twice. Students are complaining, she'd said. They say your lectures feel oppressive, that the room gets cold, that they hear things. You need to tone it down. I'm just teaching history, Ben had replied. Then teach it without the theatrics. But it wasn't theatrics. The presence had followed him home. It sat in the corner of his office during department meetings. It stood behind him when he gave lectures. Students felt it. Colleagues avoided him. Within a month, he was asked to take a leave of absence. Amara fared worse. Her fiancé left her after waking up 3 nights in a row to find wet handprints on the bedroom walls. Her research funding was pulled. 2 universities rescinded job offers. Was it worth it? She asked Ben over a video call 6 months after publication. He looked at the corner of his room, where the shadow waited, patient and eternal. Ask me in 100 years, he said. 1 year later, Ben received an email from a researcher in Senegal. I've been tracing the names, the few mentioned in Harrow's journal, plus oral histories from villages along the coast. I've identified 43 of the 300. They had names, families, children they left behind. I'm compiling their stories. And I want you to know, I feel them with me as I work, not as ghosts, as collaborators. They guide my research. When I'm about to give up, I hear singing. When I find a name, the room gets warmer. They're not haunting us, Ben. They're partnering with us, making sure we get it right this time. Ben read the email 3 times, tears blurring the words. This was the price. Not comfort, not career, not normalcy, but truth. Undeniable, uncomfortable, permanent. He'd lost his job. Amara had lost her relationship. Lena still drew obsessively, though now she sold the artwork and donated proceeds to organizations fighting modern slavery. Dr. Chen had woken up 3 days after her collapse with no memory of the expedition. She'd quietly left academia entirely. And the presence, the 300 souls who had chosen transformation over submission, were everywhere now. In every classroom where their story was taught, in every museum that displayed their history, in every conversation about the slave trade that tried to make it abstract, clinical, forgettable. They were there, making sure no one forgot, making sure the comfortable stayed uncomfortable. Ben looked at the shadow in his corner. "Was this what you wanted?" he asked quietly. For the first time in a year, it answered. "We wanted to be human again. Not numbers, not cargo, not footnotes. You gave us that. The price is ours to bear, not yours." The shadow seemed to smile, though it had no face. "You chose truth. Now live with it, as we do." Ben nodded slowly. Outside his window, the sun was setting. Somewhere in the Atlantic, a ship lay at the bottom of the ocean, its hold empty, but not silent. And somewhere in libraries, classrooms, and museums around the world, 300 voices whispered the same message to anyone who would listen. We were here. We mattered. We chose. Remember us, not as victims, not as ghosts, as people who refuse to be forgotten. The door was opened. It would never close. And that, Ben realized, staring at the shadow that would live in his corner for the rest of his life, was exactly as it should be.